So that's the question. Will more allies join the U.S. fight against ISIS? And are these airstrikes going to be enough, ultimately, to achieve the goal of destroying this group, ultimately? Joining me now, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest, in town for the UN meetings. Good to have you in studio, Josh.
Good
Thanks
morning,
for coming
Martha. Nice to see you.
So big moment about to happen in Great Britain, because they're going to vote, and word is that they will approve to go along and participate in the airstrikes that are happening in Iraq, but very unlikely that they will do so in Syria. And that seems to be the sentiment across Europe. So what is the president going to do about that?
Well, the president's going to continue to work closely with our allies, and we're pleased with the kind of cooperation that we've already gotten. We have seen cooperation from both the French and the British to take different roles in terms of taking the fight to ISIL in Iraq in support of Iraqi and Kurdish security forces that are doing that on the ground. And we're looking for broader support across the globe for the airstrikes that are necessary in Syria as well. We certainly were pleased over the last few days to act with 5 different Arab nations who are playing an active role in that military operation. That sends a very clear signal, not just to the world, but also to our enemies at ISIL, that they're not just at war with the United States, they're at war with the broader world, including with the Muslim world. And it's critically important that those moderate voices in the Muslim world are standing up beside the United States as we take the fight to ISIL.
Absolutely, but some think that yesterday was a missed opportunity for the president, that he didn't ask for a broader mandate at the UN that would have given these European countries perhaps the pass that they needed with their own people to say, look, the UN is on board, we need to do these strikes in Syria as well, because that's where the heart of ISIS is.
The fact is, Martha, the president has had a number of conversations over the last few weeks with our allies around the globe, with our partners in the region, and the president's been very pleased with the kind of response that we've gotten from the leaders of these countries for their willingness to engage in this act.
So you think they're going to come around on this?
Well, I think that they will play an important role. There are a lot of important roles for them to play in the context of this broader operation. It's not just about carrying out airstrikes. There's important logistical support that can be provided. There's humanitarian support that's desperately needed by refugees in the region. There are a variety of ways that we can work with our partners and allies to implement a counterterrorism strategy that will succeed in degrading and ultimately destroying ISIL.
You know, it's interesting. The president's going to meet with al-Sisi, the head of Egypt, this afternoon, correct?
That's right.
And al-Sisi, as Ed just mentioned, it was quoted in the Wall Street Journal as saying that he cautioned the administration against washing its hands of the Middle East at a time when the region's borders are in flux and the threat of militancy is growing with the instability. It seems that some of these countries are holding against this administration some of the prior actions that they've taken, that they are resentful of the way that we acted during the Arab Spring, and that they're holding those cards close to their vest and saying, you want our help now? We have a lot of problems over in our neck of the woods. Are you going to commit to those as well?
Yeah. I think what we're seeing in this region of the world is a lot of instability. A lot of it is homegrown, and some of it is rooted in extremism, which is very dangerous. Some of it is also rooted in this desire of citizens across the country that aren't extremists, that are moderate, that are seeking to have a greater voice in their government. So this is a very turbulent time in the region. And I think what you're seeing, and I think this is a testament to the president's leadership, that countries in that region want the United States to be involved. They trust us to be involved, to be a force for good in that region of the world. And that is why we're seeing these Arab nations work with the United States to take the fight to ISIL. They recognize the threat that it poses, not just to the United States and our Western allies, but also to the countries that are right there in the neighborhood. That ISIS wreaking havoc in that neck of the woods is right on their doorstep, and that's not good for their countries.
But the administration has said many times it's not just ISIS. There are a lot of groups out there that we're really worried about. And al-Sisi is saying, you know, look at Yemen, for example, which the president cited as a success the other day. And now look at what's going on in Yemen. Are we removing our people from the embassy there in Yemen? Is that what's going to happen?
Well, you know, the State Department is watching that situation very carefully. And Yemen is obviously a very dangerous place. But there is no doubt that the counterterrorism strategy that we've implemented in places like Yemen, in places like Somalia, where we have built up the capacity of local forces to take the fight on the ground to the extremists in their own country, providing some support to the central government, and then where necessary, backing up that support with American military air power, that has been successful in mitigating the threat that is posed by these extremist groups that do wish harm on the United States. Now, we remain vigilant about those threats. Those threats are enduring, but there's no doubt that those threats have been mitigated because of the strategy that the president has put in place. We don't envision a scenario where...
Not in Yemen, though. That has not been successful. Would you agree to that?
Well, no. There is a very, very virulent extremist group in Yemen that has designs on attacking the United States, and we have been successful in mitigating that threat. That is a daily effort. It requires a lot of vigilance to mitigate that threat, but there's no doubt that the strategy we put in place has mitigated it. And to be clear, we don't envision a scenario where Iraq and Syria, where we try to turn them into Yemen. or we try to turn those countries into Somalia. What we're trying to do is implement a strategy that has been successful in mitigating the extremist threat in Yemen and Somalia, and use that same strategy to mitigate the extremist threat in Iraq and in Syria.
So are we mitigating ISIL or ISIS, or are we destroying it?
The President's been very clear about what our strategy is. It's to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL.
Okay.
But in terms of what this strategy is intended to do, there is a predicate here. And it is analogous to the strategy that we have laid out and successfully implemented in places like Somalia and Yemen. But again, this is a daily effort.
So in terms of the Khorasan group, the administration had said several times, and I know you haven't had a chance to really address this question, I don't think. We were told there was no imminent threat to the homeland, that the biggest concern was overseas and perhaps to some of our interests overseas. But then we heard something very different, that this Khorasan group was launching an imminent threat. Why the quick turnaround on that group?
Well, we had talked for quite some time about ISIL not actively planning a terror plot against the U.S. homeland. Clearly, ISIL is plotting against U.S. interests in the region, and we saw the terrible violent acts that they perpetrated. Do you still believe that ISIL is not a threat to the homeland? That they are not here, that they are not in Boston and the other places that we're hearing some rumblings about? Well, this is complicated. There is no intelligence right now to indicate that they are actively plotting to strike the homeland. At the same time, we do have this broader concern about foreign terrorist fighters. So again, these are individuals with Western passports that have traveled to the region, taken up arms to fight alongside ISIL, and there's a concern that those individuals, with their training, with their equipment, with their willingness to die for their cause, that they could return back to the West and carry out acts of violence. We're very vigilant about that threat. The President convened a meeting yesterday at the United Nations to try to unite the world community to put in place measures that can mitigate the threat from those individuals. All of that, unfortunately, is separate from this other extremist group, the Khorasan group, that we did have intelligence to indicate that they were actively plotting to strike targets in the U.S. And certainly in other Western targets as well. And that did necessitate military action to counter that.
Can you confirm that Muhsin Fadli, as one outlet has reported, that he was killed in those strikes?
I've seen those news reports. The Department of Defense since Monday night has been doing what's called a battle damage assessment to try to determine exactly what the impact of the strikes was. The early reports indicate that the strikes were impactful, that they were effective, but they have not yet reached a conclusion about the fate of this individual.
And when was the President first briefed on this Khorasan group? When was he first aware of them?
Well, this is, I probably won't get into specific conversations between the President and his intel advisors, but I'll tell you that the intelligence community for quite some time now has been tracking the threat of a wide range of extremist groups operating in Syria, including this one.